You're not even pretty, but his family will take what they can get." Those were the words that shattered my world, spoken by the woman who gave birth to me. "My name is Sophia Chen Martinez, and I want you to stay with me because what happened next will change how you see family forever." Picture this. You're 23 years old, fresh out of college with a computer science degree you worked 3 jobs to pay for. You come home expecting dinner and maybe help with your student loans. Instead, you walk into your childhood living room to find your mother, your older sister Madison, and 3 complete strangers in expensive suits discussing your future like your livestock at an auction. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. That's exactly what happened to me on a Tuesday evening in March, in our modest 2-story house in Cleveland, Ohio. The house where I'd grown up believing family meant protection, love, and support. I was wrong about all 3. My mother, Patricia Martinez, sat at our old oak dining table with papers spread in front of her like she was closing a business deal, which, as it turned out, she was. Madison, my 28-year-old sister, sat beside her with red-rimmed eyes and a guilt-ridden expression that should have been my first warning. Across from them were the Andersons, Harold, his wife Beverly, and their son Derek, who looked like he'd rather be literally anywhere else on earth. "There she is," my mother announced when I walked through the front door, my laptop bag still slung over my shoulder from my internship at a tech startup downtown. "Sophia, come sit down. We need to discuss your future." I should have turned around and walked right back out that door. I should have trusted the ice-cold feeling that shot down my spine. But I was raised to be obedient, to trust my family, to believe that my mother always had my best interests at heart. So I sat down, placed my bag on the floor, and waited for whatever family discussion was apparently so urgent it required witnesses. "The Andersons have a proposition," my mother began, her voice carrying that artificially sweet tone she used when she was about to ask for something big. "Their son Derek here is looking for a suitable wife, and we think you 2 would be perfect together." I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" Derek Anderson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He was probably in his early 30s, with thinning brown hair and the soft, pale complexion of someone who spent too much time indoors. He wouldn't meet my eyes, instead focusing intently on the table's wood grain pattern. His father, Harold, cleared his throat. "What your mother means is, we're prepared to offer a substantial dowry for your hand in marriage to our Derek. It would be mutually beneficial for both families." The word dowry hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't 1823, this was 2024, in Cleveland, Ohio, in the United States of America. People didn't arrange marriages for money anymore. Except, apparently, in my living room they did. "This is insane," I said, looking around the table for someone, anyone, to tell me this was an elaborate joke. "Mom, you can't be serious." My mother's expression hardened instantly. Patricia Martinez had always been a woman who didn't like being questioned, especially not in front of strangers. At 52, she carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who'd learned early that the world was harsh and unforgiving. And she'd taught Madison and me the same lesson through sharp words and disappointed sighs. "I am completely serious, Sophia. Madison needs this money for her mortgage, and the Andersons need a wife for Derek. It's simple mathematics." Mathematics? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. We're talking about my life, not a business transaction. That's when Madison finally spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Soph, I'm going to lose the house. The bank is foreclosing next month. I owe $200,000, and I have nowhere else to turn." Madison's house was her pride and joy, a beautiful colonial in the suburbs that she'd bought 3 years ago with her ex-fiancé. When he left her at the altar and stuck her with the full mortgage, she'd struggled to keep up with payments on her teacher's salary. I'd helped her when I could, sending her money from my part-time jobs throughout college, but it was never enough. There are other options, I said desperately. You could sell the house, downsize, get a second job. She's tried all that, my mother interrupted. The market is terrible right now. She'd lose everything she's put into it. But the Andersons are offering $250,000 for a marriage contract. That's enough to save Madison's house and give us a little extra for the family. Beverly Anderson, Derek's mother, leaned forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was a woman in her 60s, impeccably dressed in a way that screamed old money and older traditions. We've been looking for the right girl for Derek for quite some time. He's very particular, and frankly, most modern women don't understand the value of a traditional marriage arrangement. Traditional? I echoed, feeling like I was stuck in some kind of fever dream. Derek will provide for you completely, Harold explained, pulling out what looked like a contract from his briefcase. You'll have a beautiful home, financial security, and the respectability of marriage to a successful family. In return, you'll be a proper wife, maintaining the household, hosting social events, and eventually providing children. The casual way he discussed my reproductive future made my skin crawl. These people were talking about buying me like I was a piece of property, and my own mother was not only allowing it, but actively facilitating it. What if I say no? I asked, though I was already dreading the answer. My mother's face turned cold, as winter stone. Then Madison loses her house, and you'll need to find somewhere else to live because I can't afford to support both of you anymore. The threat was clear. Comply or be cut off completely. I looked at Madison, hoping for support, but she couldn't meet my eyes. She was trapped too, in her own way, but she was willing to sacrifice me to save herself. Can I at least think about it? I asked, buying time to process what was happening. Of course, Beverly Anderson said graciously, but we do need an answer by Friday. We have other prospects if this doesn't work out. Other prospects. Like I was a job applicant they could easily replace. Derek finally spoke for the first time since I'd arrived. I want you to know, this wasn't my idea, he said quietly, his voice carrying a hint of apology. But my parents think it's best, and honestly, I'm tired of dating. At least this way, we both know what we're getting into. What we were getting into. A loveless marriage based on financial transaction, where I'd be expected to play house with a stranger while my family collected their payment. The casual resignation in his voice made it somehow worse than if he'd been enthusiastic about the arrangement. Sophia's a good girl, my mother continued, as if I wasn't sitting right there. She's smart, graduated summa cum laude with her computer science degree. She's clean, well-behaved, and she knows how to keep house. She's been taking care of this family since she was old enough to hold a mop. The way she listed my qualities like selling points at a car dealership made my stomach turn. I thought about all the years I'd spent being the good daughter, cooking dinner when she worked late, helping Madison with her homework, sacrificing my own social life to keep the family together after Dad died when I was 16. She's not the prettiest girl you'll find, my mother continued, and I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. But she's loyal, hard-working, and she won't give you any trouble. Sometimes that's more valuable than looks. The casual cruelty of that statement, delivered by my own mother in front of strangers, about my appearance and worth as a human being, cut deeper than anything else she'd said. I'd always known I wasn't Madison, with her blonde hair and easy smile that made people gravitate toward her. I was the quiet one, the studious one, the one who faded into the background while Madison sparkled. But hearing my mother reduce me to a list of domestic qualifications while apologizing for my face was a betrayal that carved itself into my chest. Harold Anderson nodded approvingly. We appreciate honesty. Derek isn't looking for a beauty queen. He needs a stable, practical wife who understands her role in the family. Her role in the family. Like I was auditioning for a job as a live-in. servant who occasionally had to produce heirs. The ceremony would be small, Beverly added. Just immediate family. We believe in discretion when it comes to these arrangements. The less outside interference, the better. Outside interference. They meant anyone who might point out that selling your daughter into marriage was morally reprehensible and, in most contexts, illegal. I sat there in stunned silence as they continued to discuss the logistics of my life as if I were a piece of furniture they were arranging delivery for. The wedding date, the living arrangements, the financial transfer, all of it planned without my input. Finally, I found my voice. "I need some air," I said, standing up abruptly. "Sophia," my mother started. I said, "I need some air." I grabbed my laptop bag and walked toward the back door, desperate to escape the suffocating weight of their expectations and my sister's guilty stare. I stepped onto our small back porch and breathed deeply, trying to process what had just happened. The evening air was cool against my flushed cheeks, and I could hear the familiar sounds of our neighborhood. Kids playing in nearby yards, television shows drifting through open windows, normal families living normal lives. Inside, I could hear the muffled conversation continuing without me. They were probably discussing timeline and logistics, maybe even negotiating the final price. The price for me. As I stood there in the growing darkness, something crystallized in my mind. This wasn't just about Madison's mortgage or my mother's financial struggles. This was about the fact that they saw me as expendable, as a resource, to be traded when times got tough. They'd never even considered asking if I had dreams, plans, or feelings about my own future. But what they didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that the quiet, obedient daughter they were planning to sell had been building something of her own, something that would change everything. I smiled then, alone on the back porch, because sometimes the biggest surprises come from the people you underestimate most. The girl they thought they could trade away was about to show them exactly what she was worth. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When I finally went back inside, the Andersons were gone, but the contract they'd left behind sat on the table like a poisonous snake. 23 pages of legal jargon that essentially boiled down to Sophia Martinez becomes property of the Anderson family in exchange for $250,000. My mother was in the kitchen, washing dishes with aggressive efficiency, her go-to activity when she was stressed or angry. Madison sat at the table, staring at the contract with tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," Madison whispered as soon as she saw me. "I'm so sorry, Soph. I never wanted it to come to this." "But you're okay with it now?" I asked, sitting down across from her. The betrayal in my voice was unmistakable. "I don't have a choice," she burst out. "Do you understand what losing this house means? It's not just the money I've put into it. It's my credit, my future, everything I've worked for. I'll never be able to buy another house. I'll be renting studio apartments for the rest of my life." "And what about my life?" I shot back. "What about my future?" From the kitchen, my mother's voice cut through our conversation like a blade. "Your future is secure with the Andersons. Derek has a good job, a nice family, financial stability. Most girls would be grateful for such an opportunity." Opportunity. She was calling my arranged marriage an opportunity. "Most girls aren't being sold by their own mothers," I said, louder than I'd intended. The dish my mother was washing clattered into the sink as she spun around to face me. Her dark eyes flashed with anger, and I saw the expression that had terrified me as a child. The look that preceded lectures about gratitude, responsibility, and family obligation. "Sold?" she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "Is that what you think this is? What else would you call it? You're literally trading me for money." "I'm securing your future and saving your sister's," she snapped. "This family has always looked out for each other. When your father died, Did Madison and I abandon you? No. We kept this household together. We put you through college. We supported your dreams even when money was tight. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college, I reminded her. I paid my own tuition with scholarships and student loans that I'm still paying off. And where did you live while you were doing that? She demanded. Who fed you? Who kept a roof over your head? Who drove you to job interviews when you didn't have a car? The guilt trip was classic Patricia Martinez. Every kindness became ammunition. Every act of basic parental responsibility transformed into a debt I could never repay. I'd been hearing variations of this speech my entire life. Mom, I appreciate everything you've done, but that doesn't mean you get to decide who I marry. Doesn't it? She dried her hands on the dish towel with sharp, angry movements. You're 23 years old, Sophia. Still living at home, still dependent on this family. You've had plenty of time to find someone on your own, but you haven't. You spend all your time buried in those computers, ignoring every boy who's ever shown interest. Because I'm building a career, because I have goals that don't revolve around getting married. Goals don't pay Madison's mortgage, my mother said coldly. Goals don't keep families together when times get hard. The Andersons are offering us a solution that benefits everyone. Everyone except me. Madison wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Sophia, please, just meet with Derek a few times. Get to know him. Maybe you'll actually like him. I stared at my sister. My beautiful, charming sister who'd always been the golden child, the one whose dreams mattered, whose happiness came first. Even now, facing the loss of her house, she was still the priority. Did you like him? I asked her. When you met him tonight? Madison's hesitation told me everything I needed to know. He seems nice, she said finally. A little quiet, maybe, but nice. And he's stable, Soph. He works in finance, he owns his own house, he's never been married. Some women would consider him a catch. Then why don't you marry him? The question hung in the air like smoke. Madison looked away, and my mother's jaw tightened. Because Madison is dealing with her own situation right now, my mother said. And because you're the right age, the right fit for what the Andersons are looking for. The right fit. Code for Madison was too good for an arranged marriage, but I wasn't. I picked up the contract and flipped through its pages. The language was dense and formal, but the meaning was clear enough. Upon marriage, I would relocate to the Anderson family home in Westlake, an affluent suburb about 30 minutes from Cleveland. I would assume the role of wife and homemaker. I would host social gatherings and maintain family relationships. I would defer to my husband in all major decisions. There was even a clause about children. I was expected to provide at least 2 heirs within the first 5 years of marriage. This is medieval, I said, tossing the contract back onto the table. They're talking about heirs and social obligations like we're living in some Jane Austen novel. The Andersons are an old family, my mother explained, as if that justified everything. They have traditions, expectations. Derek's grandfather built a successful import business that Derek now runs. They believe in proper family structures. Proper family structures, I repeated. You mean women who know their place. I mean wives who understand their value comes from more than a paycheck, my mother snapped. You think your computer job is going to fulfill you forever. You think sitting in an office staring at a screen is better than having a family, a home, children who love you? The irony of her lecture wasn't lost on me. My mother had worked as a secretary for 30 years, supporting our family after my father's sudden heart attack. She'd never remarried, never pursued her own dreams, never done anything but sacrifice for Madison and me. And now she was trying to convince me that independence was somehow less valuable than servitude. What if I say no? I asked again. What? If I just refuse to sign this? The silence that followed was deafening. Madison stared at her hands, and my mother's expression grew cold and calculating. Then you'll need to find your own place to live, she said finally. And your own way to pay off those student loans you mentioned. And Madison will lose her house, and this family will fall apart because one person was too selfish to help when she was needed most. There it was, the ultimatum wrapped in emotional manipulation. Sign the contract or be responsible for destroying the family. You're asking me to give up my entire life, I said, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay strong. I'm asking you to grow up and take responsibility for this family, my mother replied. The way I did when your father died. The way Madison did when she took that teaching job to help with household expenses instead of pursuing her art degree. We all make sacrifices, Sophia. It's your turn. Madison's art degree. I'd forgotten about that. How she'd wanted to study graphic design but chose education instead because it was more practical, more reliable. But she'd made that choice herself. No one had sold her to finance someone else's dreams. This is different. And you know it, I said. Is it? My mother challenged. Or are you just too spoiled to understand that sometimes love means putting family first? Spoiled. After working 3 jobs through college, after contributing to household expenses since I was 16, after always being the responsible one while Madison partied her way through her 20s. I was spoiled for wanting control over my own life. Stood up from the table, the contract's pages rustling in the tense silence. I need time to think about this. You have until Friday, my mother reminded me. The Andersons won't wait longer than that. As I headed toward the stairs, Madison called out, Sophia, wait. I turned back to see her standing by the table, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. I know this is hard, she said softly. I know it's not fair, but Derek seems like a decent guy, and the Andersons have money. You'd never have to worry about anything. You'd have security, stability, a golden cage, I finished for her. Maybe. But some cages are better than the alternatives. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. Madison had always been the dreamer, the one who believed in fairy tales and happy endings. To hear her talking about golden cages and settling for security instead of love was heartbreaking in a way I hadn't expected. Is that really what you think I deserve? I asked. A marriage without love to a man I just met because his family has money? I think you deserve to be taken care of, she said. I think you deserve not to struggle the way Mom has, the way I have. Maybe love isn't everything, Soph. Maybe sometimes practical is better. I climbed the stairs to my childhood bedroom, the same room I'd occupied for 23 years. The walls were still painted the pale yellow my mother had chosen. When I was 12, and my old academic achievement certificates hung in neat frames above my desk. Everything in this room spoke to the good daughter I'd always been. Studious, obedient, grateful. But as I sat on my narrow twin bed, surrounded by the remnants of my carefully controlled life, I realized something important. I'd been thinking, like the victim in this story, like someone who had no power, no options, no choice but to accept whatever scraps of dignity my family was willing to leave me. I pulled out my laptop and opened a folder I'd been working on for months. Something my family knew nothing about. Something that would change everything if they did. As I stared at the screen, a slow smile spread across my face. My mother thought she knew what I was worth. The Andersons thought they were buying a quiet, compliant wife. Madison thought I had no alternatives but to sacrifice myself for her mortgage. They were all about to learn how wrong they were, because the daughter they were planning to sell had been planning something of her own. And by Friday, when they expected their answer, I was going to give them one they'd never forget. I couldn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay in my childhood bed staring at the ceiling, replaying not just the evening's events, but years of moments that suddenly made terrible sense. This wasn't the first time my family had treated me like a convenient solution to their problems. It was just the most extreme. I remembered being 14 when Madison needed money for her senior prom dress. Mom couldn't afford the $300 gown Madison had fallen in love with, so guess who was expected to contribute their babysitting savings? Sophia's so practical, my mother had said. She doesn't care about fancy dresses anyway. I'd handed over the money I'd been saving for a new laptop, watching Madison twirl in front of the mirror while I wore a hand-me-down dress from our cousin to my own prom 3 years later. When I was 16 and Dad died suddenly of a heart attack, I'd been the one who stepped up without being asked. While Madison grieved dramatically and Mom worked extra hours to keep us afloat, I took over the household management, cooking dinner, doing laundry, helping Madison with her homework, even though I was younger, and dealing with my own grief. Sophia's so mature for her age, everyone said. Such a responsible girl. Responsible. That word had followed me my entire life, and I was starting to understand it was just code for the one who sacrifices so others don't have to. In high school, when Madison got caught drinking at a party and was suspended from the volleyball team, who was expected to give up their weekend job to drive her to mandatory community service? When she failed calculus and needed a tutor she couldn't afford, who spent their evenings explaining derivatives instead of studying for their own AP exams? When she got into college but couldn't handle the coursework, who helped her write papers and complete assignments during their own freshman year? Always Sophia. Reliable, practical, selfless Sophia. The pattern was so clear now that I wondered how I'd never seen it before. Madison was the golden child, the one whose dreams mattered, whose happiness was paramount. I was the support system, the safety net, the one who made everyone else's dreams possible by giving up pieces of my own. But there was something else I remembered now. Something that made my current situation even more infuriating. 3 years ago, when Madison had first started struggling with her mortgage payments, I'd offered a different solution. "Why don't you get a roommate?" I'd suggested over dinner. "That colonial has 4 bedrooms. You could easily rent out 2 of them and cover most of your mortgage." Madison had wrinkled her nose in disgust. "I'm not living with strangers, Sophia. That house is my sanctuary. I need my space, my privacy. Besides, what if they damage something? What if they're messy or loud?" "Then screen them carefully," I'd persisted. "There are plenty of young professionals who'd pay good money for a room in Westlake. You could probably get $800 a month per room. That's Wendy's $600 a month," Mom had calculated aloud. "That would more than cover your mortgage payment." But Madison had shaken her head firmly. "I didn't buy that house to turn it into a boarding house. I bought it to have a beautiful home where I could build a life. Having roommates would ruin that whole vision." So instead of compromising her vision by sharing her 4-bedroom house with paying tenants, Madison was now willing to sell her sister into marriage. The hypocrisy was staggering. I thought about all the boyfriends Madison had brought home over the years, the endless parade of men who were never quite right, never quite enough. Too boring, too poor, too clingy, too distant. She'd broken up with her fiancé, Jonathan, just 6 months before their wedding, because she'd decided he wasn't passionate enough about their relationship. "I want someone who can't live without me," she'd explained through tears. "Jonathan loves me, but he doesn't need me. I want to be someone's everything." Jonathan had been a good man, stable, kind, successful. He'd genuinely loved Madison and had been devastated when she called off the wedding. But he wasn't dramatic enough for her, wasn't the tortured romantic hero she'd been dreaming of since we were teenagers. Now, faced with losing the house she'd chosen over Jonathan's love, Madison was perfectly willing to marry me off to a stranger, because her romantic ideals were worth preserving, but mine were expendable. I remembered the conversation we'd had just last year when I'd started dating Marcus Thompson, a fellow computer science graduate who worked at a startup downtown. Marcus was sweet, funny, and we shared the same passion for technology and innovation. I'd really liked him, had started to think maybe we had a future together. But Madison had been relentlessly critical. "He's kind of boring, don't you think?" she'd said after meeting him. "I mean, all he talks about is code and computers. Don't you want someone more I don't know, exciting? I like talking about computers, I'd defended. We have things in common. But what about romance? What about passion? He seems more like a friend than a boyfriend. Mom had chimed in with her own observations. He's very practical. Not much. Of a provider, though. Working at that little startup. You want someone more established, Sophia. Someone who can take care of you. Their constant criticism had planted seeds of doubt that eventually grew into relationship-ending insecurity. I'd started seeing Marcus through their eyes instead of my own, started questioning whether our shared interests were enough, whether his modest salary at a growing company was a red flag instead of a starting point. When Marcus and I eventually broke up, not because of any real incompatibility, but because I'd become distant and critical, Madison had actually seemed relieved. You deserve better than settling, she'd said consolingly. Don't worry, the right guy will come along. But now, faced with their financial crisis, the right guy was apparently Derek Anderson, a man I'd met for 5 minutes who seemed about as passionate as a tax return. Their standards for my romantic life had certainly evolved quickly. I got out of bed and walked to my window, looking out at the quiet street where I'd grown up. Mrs. Chen across the street was tending to her garden in the early morning light, and Mr. Rodriguez was walking his ancient golden retriever like he had every morning for the past 15 years. Normal people living normal lives, making normal decisions about their futures. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was probably the only person on this street who'd been informed by their mother that they'd been sold into marriage to pay someone else's mortgage. I thought about Derek Anderson, trying to remember details from our brief meeting. He'd seemed uncomfortable with the whole arrangement, almost apologetic. That should have been reassuring, but it actually made things worse. At least if he'd been enthusiastic about acquiring a wife through financial transaction, I could have written him off as a complete monster. His reluctance suggested he might actually be a decent person, trapped in his family's archaic expectations, which somehow made the whole situation more complicated. His mother, Beverly, had mentioned they'd been looking for the right girl for Derek for quite some time. What did that mean? Was Derek so socially inept that he couldn't find a wife through normal means? Was he hiding some terrible secret that made traditional dating impossible? Or was his family so controlling that they'd driven away every woman who'd shown interest? The more I thought about it, the more questions I had. If the Andersons were as wealthy and established as they claimed, why did they need to arrange a marriage for their son? In 2024, rich families had plenty of ways to introduce their children to suitable partners without resorting to what amounted to human trafficking, unless Derek wasn't the catch his parents claimed he was. Unless there was something about him, or about their family, that made this arrangement necessary. I remembered Beverly's comment about Derek being very particular and most modern women not understanding traditional marriage arrangements. That could mean anything from Derek having impossibly high standards to Derek having some condition or requirement that made normal relationships difficult. But then again, maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe the Andersons were exactly what they appeared to be, wealthy people who believed their money entitled them to treat other human beings as commodities. Maybe Derek had simply been raised to view women as domestic employees rather than equal partners, and this arrangement seemed perfectly normal to him. Either way, the thought of binding my life to his based on a financial transaction made my skin crawl. I pulled out my phone and did something I probably should have done immediately. I Googled Derek Anderson. If I was going to be sold to this man, I wanted to know exactly what I was being sold into. What I found was nothing. No social media profiles, no professional listings, no news articles or public records beyond basic business registrations. For someone who supposedly ran a successful import business, Derek Anderson had remarkably little online presence. That could mean he was simply private, or it could mean he was hiding something. In my experience, people who went to great lengths to avoid leaving digital footprints usually had reasons for staying invisible. I tried searching for Anderson Import Company and found a basic website with minimal information. Established 1987, specializing in European luxury goods, family-owned and operated. No employee photos, no detailed company history, no customer testimonials. It was the kind of website someone created because they needed to have a website, not because they wanted to attract business. The more I researched, the more convinced I became that something about this whole situation was off. Normal families didn't arrange marriages for their adult children. Normal businesses didn't have virtually no online presence. Normal men in their 30s didn't need their parents to find them wives. But then again, nothing about my family's behavior was normal either. Normal mothers didn't sell their daughters to pay their other daughters' debts. Normal sisters didn't guilt their siblings into arranged marriages. Normal families found solutions that didn't involve human sacrifice. As the sun rose higher and I heard my mother and Madison starting to move around downstairs, I made a decision. I was going to play along with their little game, but I was going to do it on my terms. If they wanted to treat me like a commodity to be bought and sold, I was going to make sure I got the best possible price. And I was going to make sure they understood exactly what they were trading away, because they had no idea what I was really worth. But they were about to find out. The next morning, I came downstairs to find my mother and Madison whispering urgently at the kitchen table. They stopped talking the moment they saw me, which told me everything I needed to know about the topic of their conversation. "Good morning, sweetheart," my mother said with forced brightness. "I made your favorite, blueberry pancakes." She hadn't made me blueberry pancakes in years, not since I'd started making my own breakfast to get to my early morning classes. The obvious attempt at manipulation would have been laughable if it weren't so pathetic. "Thanks," I said, helping myself to coffee. "I've been thinking about what we discussed yesterday." Madison perked up immediately. "And?" "I want to meet with Derek again. Alone this time. If I'm going to consider this arrangement, I need to know who I'd be marrying." My mother's relief was visible. "Of course, that's very reasonable. I'll call Beverly this morning and arrange something." "Actually," I said, sitting down with my coffee, "I'd prefer to handle the arrangements myself. If Derek and I are going to be married, we should probably start communicating directly instead of through our mothers." The logic was unassailable, but I could see my mother's discomfort with losing control of the situation. "Well, I suppose that makes sense. I'll get his number from Beverly." "Perfect." I pulled out my phone and opened a new note. "While you're at it, I'll need some other information too." "What kind of information?" Madison asked. "Financial records?" I said matter-of-factly. "If I'm entering into what amounts to a business arrangement, I need to understand the full scope of what I'm agreeing to. I want to see Derek's tax returns for the past 3 years, proof of income, bank statements, and documentation of any debts or financial obligations." The silence that followed was deafening. "Sophia," my mother said slowly, "I don't think that's how these arrangements typically work." "Then maybe these arrangements are typically between people who don't have computer science degrees and an understanding of contract law," I replied. "I've been reading about prenuptial agreements and marriage contracts. If the Andersons want to treat this like a business transaction, then I'm going to approach it like a businesswoman." Madison shifted uncomfortably. "Don't you think you're being a little aggressive? I mean, these people are doing us a favor." "Are they?" I asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, Derek's getting a wife, housekeeper, social hostess, and eventual mother to his children for the low price of $250,000. Meanwhile, I'm getting a husband I don't know, a life I didn't choose, and the privilege of abandoning my career to play house in Westlake." "Exactly who is doing whom a favor here?" My mother's expression hardened. "You're being unreasonable, Sophia. The Andersons are a respected family. They don't need to submit to your interrogation. And I don't need to submit to marriage without proper due diligence," I countered. If they're not willing to be transparent about Derek's financial situation, then maybe they're not as respectable as they claim to be. I could see the panic creeping into Madison's eyes. Soph, please don't mess this up. This is my only option. No, it's not, I said firmly. You have plenty of options. You've just rejected all of them because they require you to make sacrifices instead of me making them for you. That's not fair, isn't it? I stood up, my coffee still untouched. Madison, you've rejected getting roommates, rejected selling and downsizing, rejected getting a second job, rejected asking Jonathan for help even though he'd probably say, yes, because he still cares about you. You've rejected every solution that would require you to change your lifestyle. But you're perfectly willing to trade away my entire future to maintain your 4-bedroom house in the suburbs. It's not just about the house, Madison protested. It's about my credit, my future. What about my future? I demanded. What about my credit when I have to quit my job and abandon my career to be Derek Anderson's wife? What about my dreams, my goals, my right to choose my own path? My mother slammed her hand on the table. Enough, Sophia, you're being selfish and dramatic. This family has always pulled together in times of crisis, and this is no different. Actually, it is different, I said calmly, because this time, instead of asking me to contribute money or time or effort, you're asking me to contribute my entire life. And unlike all those other times, this time I have something to say about it. I pulled out my laptop and set it on the table, opening the folder I'd been working on for months. My mother and Madison leaned forward, curious despite themselves. What's that? Madison asked. My insurance policy, I said. Or maybe my get-out-of-jail-free card. I haven't decided what to call it yet. On the screen was a comprehensive business plan, complete with financial projections, market analysis, and patent applications. At the top of the first page, in bold letters, was the title, Smart Home Security Solutions, Revolutionary AI-Powered Home Automation System. My mother frowned at the screen. What is this? This, I said, turning the laptop so they could see, it better, is the mobile app and AI system I've been developing for the past 8 months. It's a revolutionary home security and automation platform that learns user behavior patterns to predict and prevent break-ins, optimize energy usage, and provide personalized home management solutions. Madison stared at the screen, clearly not understanding what she was looking at. You've been working on an app? Not just an app, a complete ecosystem. The mobile application connects to proprietary hardware that I've designed and prototyped. It uses machine learning algorithms to create predictive models for home security and energy management. The technology is so advanced that I've already filed for 3 separate patents. My mother was scanning the documents with growing confusion. Sophia, this all looks very impressive, but what does it have to do with— Technova Industries made me an offer last week, I interrupted. They want to buy my technology and hire me as their head of AI development. The offer is for $2.8 million for the patents and intellectual property, plus a starting salary of $180,000 per year with equity options. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the neighbor's dog barking 3 houses away. $2.8 million, Madison whispered. Plus salary and benefits, I confirmed. I turned them down because I wanted to build my own company instead of selling to a corporation. But the offer is still on the table. My mother's face had gone completely white. You have $2.8 million? I have the opportunity to have $2.8 million, I corrected. And that's just the first offer. My patent attorney thinks I could get significantly more if I shopped it around to multiple companies. Apparently, the predictive algorithm I developed is considered groundbreaking in the field. Madison was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Why didn't you tell us? If you have access to that kind of money, you could help me with the mortgage yourself. Could I? I asked. Because when I suggested you get roommates to solve your financial problems, you said that would ruin your vision for your house. When I suggested you sell and downsize, you said you couldn't bear to give up your dream home. But now that you know I might have money, suddenly I'm expected to hand it over to preserve the lifestyle you've been unwilling to compromise? It's different, Madison said desperately. This would be family helping family, and what was the arranged marriage supposed to be? This is, my mother started, then stopped, clearly struggling to process what I'd told them. Sophia, if you have access to this kind of money, why didn't you mention it when we were discussing the Anderson arrangement? Because the Anderson arrangement isn't about solving Madison's financial problems, I said. It's about the fact that you've always seen me as the expendable daughter, the one whose dreams matter less, whose happiness is negotiable, whose future can be sacrificed for the family's convenience. I closed the laptop and looked at both of them. If this were really about the money, you would have asked me if I had any solutions before arranging to sell me to strangers. But you didn't ask, because it never occurred to you that quiet, practical Sophia might have her own resources, her own plans, her own value beyond what I could provide to this family. Madison was crying now. Sophia, I'm sorry. I didn't know. That's exactly the problem, I said. You didn't know because you never asked. Neither of you have ever asked about my work, my goals, my projects, or my life beyond how it can benefit the family. You know I work in tech, but you've never once asked what I actually do, what I'm building, or what my future might look like. We're proud of you, my mother said weakly. We know you're smart. You know I'm useful, I corrected. There's a difference. And the fact that you're both sitting here looking shocked that I might have achieved something significant tells me everything. I need to know about how much faith you've had in my potential. I stood up, leaving the laptop on the table. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to take Derek Anderson out to dinner, and I'm going to have a conversation with him about what his family is really looking for in this arrangement. I'm going to find out why a supposedly successful man in his 30s needs his parents to buy him a wife. And then I'm going to make some decisions about my future. Sophia, my mother started. But those decisions will be mine to make, I continued. Not yours, not Madison's, not the Anderson family's. Mine. Because while you've been treating me like a commodity to be traded, I've been building something that proves I'm worth a lot more than $250,000. I headed toward the stairs, then turned back. Oh, and Madison? If you decide you want help with your mortgage, we can discuss terms. But it won't involve me sacrificing my life to preserve your lifestyle. It'll involve you making the same kinds of compromises that adults make when they're facing financial difficulties. As I climbed the stairs, I heard Madison burst into tears and my mother trying to comfort her. But for the first time in my life, their emotional manipulation didn't make me feel guilty, because I finally understood my own worth, and it was a lot more than they'd ever given me credit for. 2 hours later, I had Derek Anderson's phone number and a dinner reservation at Chez Laurent, one of Cleveland's most expensive restaurants. If the Andersons wanted to play the game of wealth and status, I was going to show them I could play it better than they imagined. I spent the afternoon preparing for what would be the most important dinner of my life. Not because I was considering marrying Derek. That ship had sailed the moment I realized my family's true opinion of me, but because I needed information. If I was going to dismantle this arrangement completely, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. My first call was to my patent attorney, David Kim, a sharp Harvard graduate who'd been helping me navigate the intellectual property landscape for my AI system. Sophia, he said, sounding pleased to hear from me. Please tell me you're calling to accept the Technova offer. That deal won't stay on the table forever. Actually, I'm calling about something else entirely, I said. I need you to run a comprehensive background check on someone. Derek Anderson supposedly runs Anderson Import Company here in Cleveland. I need to know everything. Financial records, business dealings, any legal issues, personal history. There was a pause. This isn't about a potential business partnership, is it? It's about a potential marriage contract, I said dryly. A what now? I gave David the abbreviated version of my family's arrangement with the Andersons. By the time I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Sophia, he said finally, you realize this sounds like something out of the 1800s, right? Arranged marriages, for financial gain, aren't exactly legal in modern America. They're not illegal either, as long as both parties consent. The question is whether Derek Anderson is someone I could ever consent to marry, and whether his family is hiding something that makes this arrangement necessary. Give me until tomorrow morning, David said. I'll have a complete financial and legal profile ready for you. But, Sophia, if this family is pressuring you into marriage, there are other options. You have significant assets now. You don't need to depend on anyone. I know, I said, but I want to understand exactly what game they're playing before I flip the board. Second call was to my friend Jennifer Wu, who worked as an investigative journalist for the Cleveland Plain Dealer. Jennifer and I had met in a Women in Tech meetup 2 years ago, and she'd always been interested in stories about financial fraud and family corruption. Jen, I need a favor, I said when she answered. I need you to dig into a family called the Andersons. They claim to run an import business, but something feels off about them. Define off, Jennifer said, and I could hear her already reaching for a pen. They're wealthy enough to offer $250,000 for an arranged marriage, but their online presence is virtually non-existent. Their business website looks like it was built in 1999 and never updated. And they're so desperate to find a wife for their son that they're willing to pay a stranger's family for the privilege. Arranged marriage? Jennifer's voice sharpened with interest. In Cleveland? In 2024? That's what I thought too. Can you see what you can find? Business records, property ownership, any legal issues or news coverage. This sounds like it could be a hell of a story, Jennifer said. Give me everything you've got. I spent the next hour giving Jennifer every detail I could remember about the Andersons, from their expensive clothing to their formal manner of speaking to the specific terms of their proposed contract. By the time I hung up, I could practically hear her investigative instincts humming. My third preparation was more personal. I went through my closet and selected the most expensive outfit I owned, a black designer dress I'd bought for my college graduation, paired with the diamond earrings. My grandmother had left me. If Derek Anderson was expecting to meet the quiet, grateful girl his parents had described, he was in for a surprise. At 6 p.m. sharp, I walked into Chez Laurent looking like I belonged there. The restaurant was all crystal chandeliers and white tablecloths, the kind of place where a single meal cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. I'd chosen it deliberately because I wanted Derek to understand from the moment I walked in that I wasn't desperate, wasn't grateful, and wasn't the easy target his family seemed to think I was. Derek was already seated at a corner table, and he stood when he saw me approaching. He looked different than he had during our family meeting, more relaxed, less uncomfortable. He was wearing a well-tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and his hair was styled in a way that made him look more confident than he'd seemed surrounded by our parents. Sophia, he said, extending his hand. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Thank you for making time, I replied, shaking his hand and noting that his grip was firm and his palms weren't sweaty. Whatever nerves he'd shown during our first meeting seemed to have disappeared. We sat down, and I studied him more carefully. Derek Anderson wasn't unattractive. He had kind brown eyes and a genuine smile that made him seem more approachable than his stiff demeanor had suggested. He was probably about 6 feet tall, with the soft build of someone who worked behind a desk but tried to stay in shape. I have to admit, he said after we'd ordered drinks, I wasn't sure you'd want to meet again after the way our parents handled things the other night. It was intense, I agreed. I'm curious about something, though. How long have your parents been planning this arrangement? Derek's expression grew uncomfortable. Longer than I'd like to admit. They've been pressuring me to get married for years, and when I couldn't find someone who met their standards, he shrugged. They decided to take matters into their own hands. What kind of standards? The usual ones. Good family background, appropriate education, willingness to embrace traditional values. He paused. Someone who wouldn't challenge the way our family operates. That last comment was interesting. And how exactly does your family operate? Derek was quiet for a moment, studying his wine glass. My parents believe in maintaining certain traditions, gender roles, family hierarchies, that sort of thing. They want a daughter-in-law who'll fit into their vision of what a proper Anderson family should look like. And what does that vision include? A wife who supports her husband's career, maintains the family home, hosts social events, and eventually provides grandchildren. Someone who understands that family reputation is more important than individual desires. The way he said it, with a slight edge of resignation, made me think Derek wasn't entirely comfortable with his family's expectations either. What about your desires? I asked. What do you want in a wife? Derek looked surprised by the question, as if no one had ever asked him before. Honestly, I don't know anymore. I used to think I wanted someone I could fall in love with, someone who shared my interests, someone I could be myself around. But after years of my parents rejecting every woman I've dated, I started to wonder if I was being unrealistic. What happened to the women you dated? They weren't suitable, Derek said, his voice flat. Too independent, too career-focused, too modern. My mother found fault with all of them. Eventually, I stopped trying to meet women on my own because I knew my parents would just find reasons to disapprove. This was painting a picture of Derek as someone who'd been emotionally manipulated by his controlling parents, just like I'd been manipulated by my family. The difference was that Derek seemed to have given up fighting, while I was just getting started. Derek, I said carefully, can I ask you something directly? Of course. Do you actually want to marry me? Setting aside your parents' wishes and my family's financial situation, are you personally interested in building a life with someone you barely know? Derek was quiet for so long I started to wonder if he was going to answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. No, he said. I mean, you seem like a lovely person, and I'm sure you'd make someone very happy. But this whole arrangement feels wrong to me. I want to marry someone because we love each other, not because our families made a business deal. His honesty was both refreshing and concerning. If Derek wasn't enthusiastic about the marriage, why was he going along with it? Then why are you here? I asked. Derek's smile was sad. Because I'm a coward, I suppose. Because I'm 32 years old and I've never stood up to my parents about anything that really mattered. Because I've let them control my life for so long that I don't know how to stop. What would happen if you told them you didn't want to go through with this? They'd find someone else for me to marry, Derek said matter-of-factly. They've made it clear that my inheritance, my position in the company, and my place in the family all depend on my willingness to marry someone they approve of. If I refuse this arrangement, they'll just make another one. And you're okay with that? I'm tired of fighting it, Derek admitted. At least with you, I know you're intelligent and educated. Some of their other suggestions have been... He shuddered slightly. Let's just say you're the best option they've presented. The best option. Not someone he was excited to marry, just the least objectionable choice among several unpleasant alternatives. Derek, I said, leaning forward, what if I told you there might be a way out of this? For both of us? His eyes widened with something that looked like hope. What do you mean? I mean, what if we worked together to give our families exactly what they deserve for treating us like commodities instead of people? Derek stared at me for a long moment. Sophia, what are you planning? I smiled, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, it was a genuine expression of anticipation. I'm planning to show both our families that the children they've been manipulating are a lot more powerful than they ever imagined. The next morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls from David Kim and a text message that simply read, "Call me ASAP. You're not going to believe what I found." I called him back while making coffee, already knowing that whatever he'd discovered was going to change everything. "Sophia," David said without preamble, "the Anderson family is not what they claim to be. Not even close." "What do you mean?" "I mean, Anderson Import Company is essentially a shell corporation. They've reported losses for the past 4 years running. They have no significant assets, and their office address is a mail forwarding service in a strip mall. Derek Anderson doesn't run a successful import business. He's unemployed and has been for almost 2 years. I sat down heavily at the kitchen table. Unemployed? Gets worse. The family home in Westlake? It's mortgaged to the hilt and 3 months behind on payments. Harold Anderson filed for bankruptcy protection last year, and Beverly Anderson has maxed out credit cards totaling over $180,000. They're not wealthy, Sophia. They're desperate. My mind raced through the implications. Then why are they offering $250,000 for a marriage arrangement? Because they're not planning to pay it, David said grimly. My guess is they're looking for someone with assets they can access once Derek is married. Community property laws, joint accounts, spousal financial responsibility. There are dozens of ways they could legally claim a portion of their daughter-in-law's wealth. They were never going to pay my family, I said, understanding dawning. They were planning to marry Derek to someone with money and then find ways to access those funds. Exactly. And Sophia, there's something else. Derek Anderson has been married before. Twice. What? First marriage lasted 8 months. Ended in divorce with accusations of financial fraud. The wife claimed Derek and his family had stolen $50,000 from her savings account. Second marriage lasted 6 months, ended when the wife discovered Derek had been forging her signature on loan applications. She filed for annulment and a restraining order. I felt sick. So this is their pattern. They find women with money, marry Derek to them, steal whatever they can, and then move on to the next victim. That's what it looks like. And Sophia, based on the background check your mother probably didn't run, Derek has a criminal record. Identity theft, check fraud, forgery. He's been arrested 3 times, but only convicted once because his victims were too embarrassed to press charges or couldn't prove the family connection. I thought about Derek's performance at dinner last night. The reluctant victim routine. The claims about wanting love and authenticity. The suggestion that we work together against our families. It had all been an act designed to make me trust him, to make me an ally instead of a suspicious target. There's more, David continued. I found records of at least 6 other families they've approached with similar marriage proposals over the past 3 years. Always targeting families with financial problems and unmarried daughters who might have assets or earning potential. They're professional marriage scammers, I said. That's exactly what they are. And Sophia, the really concerning part is that 2 of their previous targets have restraining orders against them, and one filed a police report claiming harassment and stalking when she refused their proposal. My phone buzzed with another call. Jennifer Wu. David, I need to take another call. Can you email me everything you found? Already sent. And Sophia? Be very careful. These people are not just desperate, they're dangerous. I switched calls to Jennifer, who sounded even more excited than David had been alarmed. Sophia. Holy shit. This story is insane, Jennifer said without preamble. The Anderson family isn't just broke. They're wanted for questioning in a fraud investigation in Michigan. They disappeared from Detroit 6 months ago, owing over $400,000 to various creditors. Disappeared? Vanished overnight. Left behind rent debts, unpaid utilities, and at least 3 families claiming Derek Anderson had defrauded their daughters through marriage schemes. The FBI has an open file on them. I felt like the room was spinning. The FBI? Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit marriage fraud. They've been running this scam across multiple states. Cleveland is just their latest hunting ground. Jennifer, I need you to do something for me. I need you to contact Detective Maria Santos at Cleveland PD. Tell her you're working on a story about marriage fraud, and that you have information about an active scheme involving the Anderson family. Are you going to press charges? I'm going to do better than that, I said, my mind already working through the possibilities. I'm going to give them exactly what they deserve. After hanging up with Jennifer, I sat staring at my phone for several minutes. Derek's performance last night had been masterful. The reluctant victim, the controlled son, the man who just wanted to find real love. He'd made me feel sorry for him, made me want to help him escape his family's manipulation. When in reality, he was the predator and I was intended to be his next victim. My phone rang again. This time it was Derek. Sophia, he said, his voice warm and friendly. I had such a wonderful time last night. I've been thinking about what you said, about working together. I'd love to hear more about your ideas. I bet you would, I said, coolly. There was a pause. Is everything okay? You sound different. Derek, I'm curious about something. When you mentioned your parents' other marriage proposals, were you referring to women in Cleveland, or were you thinking about your conquests in Michigan? The silence that followed was so complete I could have heard a pin drop. I'm sorry, Derek said finally, his voice carefully controlled. I'm not sure what you're referring to. Really? Because I'm referring to Lisa Hoffman in Detroit, who lost $50,000 to your family's marriage scam, and Michelle Chen in Grand Rapids, who had to file for bankruptcy after you and your parents cleaned out her accounts. Should I keep going? Or would you like to explain how those situations were different from what you're planning to do to me? Another long pause. When Derek spoke again, his voice had changed completely. Gone was the hesitant, apologetic tone from last night. This voice was cold, calculating, and completely unrepentant. You've been busy, he said. Professional habit? I replied. I believe in doing thorough research before making major life decisions, like marriage or pressing criminal charges. Sophia, I think there's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding was thinking I'd be as easy to manipulate as your previous victims, I interrupted. But here's what's going to happen, Derek. You're going to call your parents and tell them the deal is off. You're going to leave Cleveland immediately. And you're going to pray that I don't decide to hand over everything I've discovered to the FBI. You can't prove anything, Derek said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Can I? I have financial records showing your family's bankruptcy. I have contact information for your previous victims. I have documentation of your criminal history and evidence of your current fraud attempts. I have enough evidence to send all three of you to federal prison for conspiracy and wire fraud. What do you want? Derek asked bluntly. I want you gone, today. And I want you to stay gone. And if we leave quietly, then I'll consider letting you disappear without involving law enforcement. But Derek, if I hear about you approaching any other families, if I see your names in the news in connection with any other marriage scams, if I even suspect you're continuing this pattern somewhere else, I will personally make sure the FBI knows exactly where to find you. Derek was quiet for a moment. You know, we really could have made this work, Sophia. You're smarter than most of our usual targets. We could have taken our time, made it more convincing. The casual way he discussed. Defrauding me made my skin crawl. Goodbye, Derek. This isn't over, he said. Yes, it is. And Derek, if you or your family come anywhere near me or my family again, you'll discover that the quiet computer science graduate you thought you could scam has resources you never imagined. I hung up and immediately called Detective Santos, whom Jennifer had already contacted. The detective was very interested in meeting with me to discuss what I'd discovered about the Anderson family's activities. But first, I had one more call to make. My mother answered on the second ring. Sophia, sweetheart, how did your dinner with Derek go? Beverly called this morning asking about wedding timeline discussions. Mom, we need to talk. The Anderson family is not who they claim to be. What do you mean? I mean, they're criminals. Mom, they're wanted by the FBI for marriage fraud. They've been running this scam across multiple states, targeting families exactly like ours. They were never going to pay you $250,000. They were planning to steal whatever money I have after marrying Derek. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Mom? Are you certain about this? I'm meeting with the FBI this afternoon to turn over all the evidence I've collected. Derek and his family will probably be arrested by tomorrow. I heard my mother sink into a chair. Oh my God, Sophia, what have we done? You tried to sell me to criminals to pay Madison's mortgage, I said matter-of-factly. But don't worry, Mom. I handled it. How did you know to investigate them? Because unlike you and Madison, I didn't assume that someone offering to solve our problems was automatically trustworthy. I did my homework. Sophia, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Of course you didn't, I said. Because you were so focused on getting rid of me to solve Madison's problems that you never bothered to verify whether the solution was legitimate. I could hear Madison in the background, asking what was wrong. Tell Madison her mortgage problems are about to be the least of her worries, I said. Because tomorrow, she's going to wake up to news reports about how her sister single-handedly exposed a multi-state marriage fraud ring. I think that's worth a lot more than $250,000, don't you? For the first time in my life, my mother had absolutely nothing to say. The FBI field office in Cleveland was nothing like I'd expected. Detective Maria Santos met me in a sterile conference room that smelled like coffee and industrial carpet, accompanied by Special Agent Rebecca Torres, a sharp-eyed woman who looked like she'd seen every type of fraud imaginable. Ms. Martinez, Agent Torres said as we settled around the table. Detective Santos filled me in on the basics, but I'd like you to walk me through everything from the beginning. I spent the next 2 hours detailing the entire Anderson family scheme, providing copies of all the documentation David had uncovered, and explaining how their marriage proposal had led me to investigate their background. Agent Torres took meticulous notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions that showed she understood exactly how sophisticated this fraud operation was. This matches a pattern we've been tracking across 6 states, she said when I finished. The Anderson family, though that may not be their real name, has been running variations of this scheme for at least 5 years. They target families with financial problems and unmarried daughters who appear to have assets or earning potential. How many victims have there been? I asked. That we know of? 14 families with total losses exceeding $800,000. But those are just the ones who were willing to report the crimes. We suspect there are others who were too embarrassed or afraid to come forward. Detective Santos leaned forward. Ms. Martinez, I have to ask, given what you've discovered about your own financial situation, were you ever tempted to go through with the marriage to access their promised payment? I almost laughed. Detective, they weren't planning to pay anything. Their entire operation was designed to steal from me, not give money to my family. If I'd married Derek, I would have lost everything I've worked for. But your family didn't know that when they arranged this, Agent Torres observed. From their perspective, they were solving a financial crisis. From their perspective, they were selling me like livestock, I corrected. The fact that the buyers turned out to be criminals doesn't make the original transaction any less reprehensible. Agent Torres studied me carefully. You sound angry with your family. I am angry. With my family, wouldn't you be? What I'm concerned about, she continued, is whether you're planning any kind of retaliation that might interfere with our investigation. I considered the question seriously. Agent Torres, I'm not planning to do anything illegal, but I am planning to make sure my family understands the full consequences of their actions. What does that mean exactly? It means they're about to learn what it feels like to be the ones whose lives are turned upside down for someone else's benefit. After leaving the FBI office, I drove to Madison's house in Westlake, the same house she'd been so desperate to save that she'd been willing to trade me for it. I hadn't called ahead, so when she opened the door and saw me standing on her porch, her face went white. "Sophia," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I've been trying to call you all day." "I've been busy," I said, walking into her beautifully decorated living room. The house really was gorgeous. Hardwood floors, crown molding, a stone fireplace. That probably cost more than most people's cars. I could understand why Madison loved it so much. I could also understand why she'd been willing to sacrifice her sister to keep it. "Mom told me about the Anderson family," Madison said, sitting down on her expensive sofa. "About them being criminals." "Sophia, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." "No, you didn't," I agreed. "Because you never bothered to find out. You were so focused on your own problems that you didn't care who you were handing me over to, as long as they solved your mortgage crisis." Madison's eyes filled with tears. "That's not fair. We thought they were a respectable family. We thought Derek would take care of you. You thought Derek would take me off your hands so you wouldn't have to feel guilty about your financial irresponsibility." I corrected. "There's a difference." "I never wanted to hurt you," Madison whispered. "But you were willing to hurt me," I said. "That's what matters. When it came down to choosing between your comfort and my freedom, you chose your comfort without hesitation." I walked over to the mantelpiece, where Madison had displayed dozens of photos of herself. Graduation, vacations, parties, professional portraits. There wasn't a single photo that included me. "Madison, I want you to understand something," I said, turning back to face her. "The Anderson family didn't just target our family randomly. They researched us. They knew you were facing foreclosure. They knew Mom was struggling financially. And they knew I was the family member everyone considered expendable." "We don't consider you expendable." "Don't you?" I interrupted. "When was the last time you asked about my work? When was the last time you showed interest in my goals, my relationships, my life outside of how it affected you?" Madison was quiet, clearly trying to think of an example and coming up empty. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "The Anderson family will be arrested within the next 48 hours. The story will be all over the local news because Jennifer Wu is running a feature article about marriage fraud targeting Cleveland families. Your name will be mentioned as one of the families who nearly fell victim to their scheme." Madison's face went even paler. "My name will be in the news?" "As part of a criminal investigation, yes. Your colleagues at school will read about how you tried to solve your mortgage problems by arranging your sister's marriage to criminals. Your neighbors will learn that the foreclosure you've been hiding is about to happen anyway, since there never was $250,000 coming from the Andersons." "Sophia, please," Madison begged. "Isn't there a way to keep this private?" "The way you tried to keep my feelings private when you decided my future without consulting me?" I asked. "No, Madison. Some things can't be hidden or managed or fixed with other people's sacrifices." I walked toward the door, then turned back. "Oh, and Madison, about your mortgage situation. I meant what I said yesterday. If you want help, we can discuss terms. But those terms will involve you taking responsibility for your choices and making adult decisions about your lifestyle." "What kind of terms?" she asked hopefully. "Sell this house. Buy something you can actually afford on a teacher's salary. Get a roommate or a second job to help with expenses. Live like a responsible adult instead of like someone whose problems can always be solved by other people's sacrifices." "But I love this house," Madison protested. "It's my dream home." "And I loved my freedom," I replied. "But you were perfectly willing to sacrifice that for your dream home. Now you get to choose what matters more, your pride or your financial stability." I left Madison crying in her beautiful living room and drove to my mother's house, where I found her pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. "Sophia, she said as soon as I walked in. "We need to talk about this FBI situation. What exactly did you tell them?" "I told them the truth," I said, sitting down at the kitchen table. "That the Anderson family approached our family with a marriage proposal, that you and Madison encouraged me to accept it, and that my investigation revealed they were criminals planning to defraud me. But you didn't mention anything about us pressuring you, did you?" I stared at my mother. Even now, faced with the complete collapse of her scheme, she was worried about her own liability rather than the fact that she'd nearly handed her daughter over to federal criminals. "Mom, what exactly are you afraid I told them?" "Nothing," she said quickly. "I just want to make sure we're all telling the same story." We are telling the same story. The true story. The Anderson family targeted our family because they knew we were vulnerable. They offered you money to arrange a marriage with me. You encouraged me to accept without doing any verification of who they were or what they wanted. If I hadn't investigated them myself, I would have married a criminal and lost everything I've worked for. My mother sat down heavily. "Sophia, I was trying to secure your future. No, you were trying to solve Madison's problems by trading away my future. There's a difference." "What do you want from me?" my mother asked, her voice breaking. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to admit that you've never seen me as anything more than a resource to be used when the family needed something," I said. "I want you to acknowledge that you were willing to sell me to strangers rather than ask if I might have my own solutions to offer." "That's not—" "Mom, I have $2.8 million in offers on the table for technology I developed myself. I could have solved Madison's mortgage crisis with a check. But you never asked what I might be able to contribute because you never believed I was capable of anything significant." My mother stared at me. "You really have that much money?" "I really do. And tomorrow, when the news story breaks about the Anderson family's arrest, the article is also going to mention that their intended victim was a young tech entrepreneur who single-handedly exposed their fraud ring. My company's patents and the FBI investigation are going to generate the kind of publicity that tech startups dream of." I stood up, looking down at the woman who had raised me to believe I was worth whatever scraps of attention and respect she was willing to offer. "The daughter you tried to sell is about to become very famous, very wealthy, and very successful," I said. "And she did it all while you were planning to trade her away for $250,000 that was never going to materialize anyway." "Sophia," my mother called as I headed for the door. "What happens now? Between us, I mean." I paused at the doorway. "Now you get to live with the consequences of your choices, just like you expected me to do. The difference is, I'm not going to sacrifice my future to make your consequences easier to bear." "Does that mean you're cutting us off?" "It means I'm finally putting myself first," I said. "The way you taught me everyone else should." As I drove away from my childhood home, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete freedom from the weight of other people's expectations. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to worry about being the good daughter, the helpful sister, the reliable family member who always put everyone else's needs before her own. Tomorrow, the world would know exactly what I was worth, and it was a lot more than $250,000. 3 months later, I stood in my new corner office on the 24th floor of downtown Cleveland's most prestigious business building, looking out at the city where I'd almost been sold into marriage by my own family. The brass nameplate on my door read, "Sophia Chen Martinez, CEO, Secure Home Technologies, Inc., a company that was now valued at $15 million and growing." The FBI had arrested the Anderson family 2 days after my meeting at the field office. It turned out their real names were Robert, Sandra, and Michael Crawford, and they were wanted in connection with fraud schemes across 8 states. Derek, whose real name was Michael, was currently serving a 3-year federal sentence for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. His parents had been sentenced to 5 years each, but the real vindication had come when Jennifer Wu's article was picked up by national news outlets. Cleveland woman exposes multi-state marriage fraud ring had been featured on CNN, NBC, and even 60 Minutes. The story of a tech entrepreneur who'd single-handedly brought down a criminal organization while exposing the dark reality of modern arranged marriages had captured the public imagination. The publicity had been incredible for my business. 3. Major venture capital firms had reached out with investment offers. Tech companies across the country wanted to license my AI technology. And most satisfying of all, I'd been invited to speak at conferences about both cybersecurity innovation and family financial abuse. My phone buzzed with a text from David Kim. Board meeting moved to 3 p.m. Also, Forbes wants to schedule a follow-up interview about the IPO timeline. An IPO. 6 months ago, I'd been living in my childhood bedroom, being told I wasn't pretty enough to deserve better than an arranged marriage. Now I was preparing to take my company public with an estimated valuation that would make me one of the youngest female tech CEOs in the country. There was a knock on my office door. My assistant, Rebecca, poked her head in. "Ms. Martinez, your mother is here. She says she doesn't have an appointment, but she was hoping you could spare a few minutes." I hadn't spoken to my mother since the day I'd walked out of her house 3 months ago. She'd called dozens of times, sent emails, even shown up at my old apartment before I'd moved out. But I'd needed time to process everything that had happened, time to build my new life without the weight of family manipulation dragging me down. "Send her in," I said. Patricia Martinez looked smaller than I remembered. She'd always carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who refused to let the world see her struggle. But now she seemed deflated, uncertain. She was wearing her best dress, the navy blue one she saved for special occasions, and carrying a bouquet of flowers that looked like they'd come from the grocery store. "Sophia," she said, standing awkwardly by the door, "your office is beautiful. I'm proud of you." "Thank you," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "Please sit down." She perched on the edge of the chair like she was ready to flee at any moment. "I've been following the news coverage. Everyone's talking about what you accomplished, how you stopped those criminals. You're famous." "It's been an interesting few months," I agreed. "Sophia, I came here to apologize," she said, the words rushing out like she'd been rehearsing them. "What we did to you was wrong. I was wrong. I should have trusted you, should have asked for your help instead of trying to sell me." I finished for her. She flinched. "I never thought of it that way. I thought I was securing your future, making sure you'd be taken care of. By people you'd never met, who you'd never investigated, who turned out to be federal criminals," I said. "Mom, what if I hadn't been smart enough to research them? What if I'd been the trusting daughter you raised me to be? I would have married Derek Crawford and lost everything." "I know," she whispered. "I know, and I can't forgive myself for putting you in that position." I studied my mother's face, seeing genuine remorse there for the first time, but remorse wasn't the same as understanding. "Mom, can I ask you something? When you arranged that marriage, did you ever consider what I wanted? Did you ever think about my dreams, my goals, my right to choose my own path?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I thought your path was too uncertain," she admitted. "You were working at that startup, living at home, still paying off student loans. I couldn't see how your computer work was going to lead to security or stability. I thought marriage to a wealthy family would give you the kind of life I never had." "The kind of life you never had," I repeated. "But what about the kind of life I wanted to have?" "I didn't think you knew what you wanted," she said honestly. "You were always so quiet, so focused on your work. You never talked about wanting to start a company or become a CEO. I thought you were just drifting." I leaned back in my chair, finally understanding the fundamental disconnect between us. My mother had spent her entire life believing that a woman's security came from marriage, from being taken care of by someone else. The idea that I might create my own security, my own success, my own legacy had been literally unimaginable to her. "Mom, I was building this company while living in your house," I said. "I was working 16-hour days, developing revolutionary technology, filing patents that are now worth millions of dollars. But because I wasn't dating or talking about marriage, you assumed I was accomplishing nothing." "I didn't understand," she said. "I still don't really understand what you do, but I can see that it's important, that you're successful." "What I do," I said, "is create technology that keeps people safe in their homes. I develop AI systems that can predict and prevent break-ins, that can optimize energy usage, that can help elderly people live independently longer. I solve real problems for real people, and I do it without needing anyone to take care of me." My mother nodded, but I could see she was struggling to reconcile this version of me with the daughter she thought she knew. "Sophia, I know I have no right to ask this, but is there any chance you could forgive me? I miss you. The house is so quiet without you, and I keep thinking about all the times I should have listened better, should have asked about your work, should have been prouder of who you were becoming instead of worried about who you might marry." I looked at this woman who had raised me, who had worked herself to exhaustion to keep our family together after my father died, who had made countless sacrifices for Madison and me. She wasn't evil or malicious. She was just trapped in an outdated worldview that had nearly destroyed both our lives. "Mom, I don't hate you," I said finally. "But I can't pretend that what happened didn't change everything between us. You were willing to trade away my autonomy, my future, my right to choose my own life. That's not something I can just forgive and forget." "What would it take?" she asked desperately. "What do I need to do to earn back your trust?" "I need you to understand that I'm not the same person who lived in your house 6 months ago," I said. "I'm not the quiet, obedient daughter who could be managed or manipulated or sold off when convenient. I'm a CEO, a patent holder, a public figure who's testified before Congress about cybersecurity. I'm someone who makes decisions that affect hundreds of employees and millions of dollars in investment. I'm trying to understand." "Then start by telling me about Madison," I said. "How is she handling her new reality?" My mother's expression grew pained. "She had to sell the house. She's renting a small apartment near her school now, and she got a second job tutoring to make ends meet. She's struggling with the adjustment. And how do you feel about that?" "I feel terrible for her, of course. She worked so hard to buy that house, and now it's gone. Because she made financial decisions she couldn't afford and then tried to solve the problem by sacrificing someone else," I pointed out. "Mom, do you see the pattern here? Madison's problems were always everyone else's responsibility to fix. My problems were always mine to handle alone. That dynamic isn't healthy for any of us." "What do you want me to say?" my mother asked. "Want you to say that you understand why I can't go back to being the family member who sacrifices her own needs for everyone else's convenience," I said. "I want you to acknowledge that the daughter you tried to sell has become more successful than any of us imagined, and that she did it by refusing to accept the limitations you tried to place on her life." My mother was crying now, quiet tears that she kept wiping away with her sleeve. "I'm proud of you, Sophia. I'm so proud of what you've accomplished. And I'm ashamed of what I almost cost you." "Thank you," I said. "That means something." "Does it mean enough for us to try again? To build a new relationship based on who you are now instead of who I thought you should be?" I considered the question carefully. Family relationships weren't business contracts. They couldn't be dissolved and restructured with clean terms and clear expectations. But they could evolve if both parties were willing to do the work. "Mom, if we're going to have a relationship, it needs to be based on mutual respect," I said. "You need to see me as an equal, not as a daughter whose life you can direct. You need to be interested in my actual work, my actual goals, my actual thoughts, not just whether I'm dating anyone or when I might get married." "I can do that," she said quickly. And you need to understand that my success doesn't obligate me to solve other people's problems the way I used to. If Madison needs help, she can ask for it respectfully and accept whatever terms I'm willing to offer. But the days of expecting Sophia to sacrifice for everyone else are over. I understand. I stood up and walked around my desk, extending my hand to help my mother up from her chair. Then let's try again. But this time, we're doing it as adults who respect each other's choices. She hugged me then, a real hug for the first time in months. I love you, sweetheart, and I really am proud of who you've become. I love you too, Mom, I said. But I love myself too now. And that's not changing. After she left, I stood at my office window again, watching the city bustle below. Tomorrow, I had meetings with potential international clients who wanted to license my technology. Next week, I was flying to Silicon Valley to meet with investors about expanding into new markets. Next month, I was being honored at a Women in Tech conference for my contributions to AI innovation. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hi, Sophia. This is Jonathan Hayes, Madison's ex-fiancé. I saw your story in the news and wanted to reach out. I'm starting a nonprofit focused on financial literacy education, and I'd love to discuss a potential partnership. Would you be interested in coffee sometime? I smiled, remembering Jonathan as one of the few genuinely good men Madison had dated. He'd been devastated when she broke their engagement, but apparently he'd channeled that pain into something productive. I typed back, I'd be very interested in learning more about your nonprofit. My assistant can coordinate our schedules. Because this was what my new life looked like. Building partnerships with people who shared my values, creating solutions to real problems, making decisions based on my own judgment rather than other people's expectations. The girl my family had tried to sell was gone forever. In her place was a woman who understood her own worth, who commanded respect rather than begging for it, who built her own security instead of depending on others to provide it. And that woman was just getting started. 1 year later, I stood on the stage at the Cleveland Convention Center, looking out at an audience of over 2,000 people who had come to hear me speak at the National Conference on Financial Independence for Women. The irony wasn't lost on me that this was the same venue where Madison had attended her teachers' conference 3 years ago, back when I was still the invisible sister whose dreams didn't matter. The stage lights were bright, but I could still make out individual faces in the crowd, women of all ages, from college students with notebooks open and pens ready, to gray-haired professionals who'd built their own empires. Some wore business suits that screamed success. Others wore casual clothes that suggested they were still finding their way. But they all had one thing in common. They were here because they believed women deserved financial independence and the right to control their own destinies. Ladies and gentlemen, the moderator announced, her voice carrying through the state-of-the-art sound system, please welcome Sophia Chen Martinez, founder and CEO of Secure Home Technologies, Forbes 30 Under 30 recipient for technology innovation, and author of the upcoming book, Refusing the Price Tag, A Guide to Financial Independence for Women. The applause was thunderous, a wave of sound that washed over me as I walked to the podium. As I adjusted the microphone, I caught sight of familiar faces in the third row. My mother, looking proud and genuinely amazed, wearing the emerald green dress I'd bought her for Christmas. Next to her sat Madison, who was recording my speech on her phone with tears already gathering in her eyes. She'd driven 2 hours from her new apartment to be here, and the fact that she'd chosen to spend her Saturday supporting me instead of catching up on grading papers meant more than she probably realized. 6 months ago, Madison had reached out to me through our mother, asking if we could meet for coffee. The Madison who sat across from me that day in the small cafe near her school was different from the sister I'd grown up with. Humbler, more self-aware, willing to acknowledge her. Pardon what had happened. The foreclosure had been a harsh teacher, but it had taught her lessons about responsibility and consequences that our family had never managed to instill. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she told me that day, stirring her coffee, nervously with hands that showed the calluses from her new part-time job at a tutoring center, "about how I always expected other people to solve my problems. You were right. I spent so many years believing that my dreams were more important than everyone else's that I forgot other people had dreams too." She'd gotten a small one-bedroom apartment near her school, taken on tutoring jobs that added 15 hours to her weekly schedule, and started teaching financial literacy classes for young adults, something that had grown out of her own painful education about living within her means. She'd even started dating someone new, a fellow teacher named Michael who appreciated her for who she was rather than the lifestyle she could provide. He drove a 10-year-old Honda and split restaurant bills with her, and Madison seemed happier than I'd ever seen her. The hardest part, she'd admitted that day, was realizing that I'd been jealous of you for years. You always seemed so focused, so sure of yourself, so independent. I felt like I needed other people to validate me, to take care of me, to make me feel important. But you just did important things. While I was posting on Instagram about my beautiful house, you were building technology that would change the world. We'd rebuilt our relationship slowly, carefully, with clear boundaries and mutual respect. Madison now asked for advice instead of expecting sacrifices, and I offered help on my terms rather than being voluntold to solve her problems. When she'd needed help with the security deposit for her apartment, she'd presented me with a written repayment plan and stuck to it religiously. When she'd wanted to enroll in a graduate program to get her master's degree, she'd researched scholarships and student aid options before asking if I knew anyone in the education field who might provide references. But today wasn't about my family, reconciliation. Today was about sharing a message that could help other women avoid the trap I'd almost fallen into. 2 years ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the convention center's excellent acoustics. My mother told me I wasn't pretty enough to deserve better than an arranged marriage to a man I'd never met. She said this to justify selling me to strangers for $250,000 to solve my sister's mortgage crisis. The audience stirred, some gasping audibly at the bluntness of my opening. In the front row, I saw a young woman in a business suit lean forward, her eyes wide with recognition. Next to her, an older woman with silver hair nodded grimly, as if she'd heard similar stories before. "I want you to understand something about that moment," I continued, clicking to my first slide. "It wasn't the first time my family had treated me like a resource to be consumed when convenient. It was just the most extreme example of a pattern that had been building my entire life." The slide showed a simple equation in bold letters: family emergency, why Sophia's sacrifice. From the time I was 14, I was the family member who gave up what I wanted, so other people could have what they needed. My babysitting money for my sister's prom dress, $300 that I'd saved for 6 months to buy a laptop for school. My weekend job to drive my sister to community service when she got caught drinking. 40 hours of work I'd scheduled specifically to save for college textbooks. My social life to tutor my sister through classes she was failing because she'd rather party than study. My relationship with a genuinely good man because my family convinced me I was settling for someone who wasn't exciting enough. I could see women throughout the audience taking notes, some nodding as they recognized their own experiences in my story. "Here's what I wish someone had told me when I was younger," I said, advancing to the next slide. "Being the responsible one in your family isn't a compliment. It's a warning sign. It means you've been trained to believe that your value comes from what you can provide to other people, not from who you are as an individual." A woman in the middle section raised her hand. "But what if you genuinely want to help your family? What if you love them and want to support them?" "That's a beautiful question," I said, "and it gets to the heart of why this pattern is so dangerous. Of course we want to help the people we love, But there's a difference between choosing to help and being expected to sacrifice. There's a difference between contributing to solutions and being the solution. I clicked to the next slide. The myth of family obligation. We're taught that family comes first, that blood is thicker than water, that good daughters always put family needs above their own desires. But here's what they don't tell you. Healthy families don't require their members to sacrifice their futures for temporary solutions to other people's problems. Healthy families celebrate each member's success and find ways to support each other that don't involve destroying anyone's individual potential. I told them about the pattern I'd finally recognized, how every family crisis had been solved by my sacrifice, how my dreams had always been considered less important than everyone else's immediate needs, how I'd been conditioned to feel guilty for wanting things for myself. When my sister was facing foreclosure, I continued, there were dozens of solutions available. She could have downsized to a smaller house, gotten roommates to help with the mortgage payment, taken a second job, asked for help from her ex-fiancé, who still cared about her and had the financial means to assist. But all of those solutions required her to make changes to her lifestyle, to admit that she'd made mistakes, to take responsibility for her own choices. I clicked to the next slide. Real solutions versus easy solutions. Selling me into marriage wasn't a solution to my sister's financial crisis. It was a way to avoid dealing with the real problem, that she'd made financial decisions she couldn't afford and needed to take responsibility for them. But sacrificing me was easier than sacrificing her 4-bedroom dream house in the suburbs. I could see women in the audience nodding vigorously, some wiping away tears. In the back, a group of younger women were whispering to each other, clearly, connecting my story to their own experiences. Here's what changed everything for me, I continued, my voice growing stronger with conviction. I realized that while my family was treating me like I had no value beyond what I could provide them, I was actually building something that would make me not just financially independent, but genuinely powerful in my own right. I clicked to a slide showing my company's growth trajectory, a sharp upward curve that told the story of my success in stark visual terms. While my family was planning my arranged marriage, I'd been developing AI technology that would revolutionize home security. I'd been working 16-hour days, filing patents, meeting with investors, building prototypes in my bedroom at night after everyone else was asleep. Secure Home Technologies is now valued at $47 million. We employ 156 people across 3 states. Our technology is being used to protect homes and families in 47 countries. Last month, we announced our IPO, which will make me one of the youngest female tech CEOs to take a company public. The applause was spontaneous and thunderous, lasting nearly a full minute. But here's the point I want you to understand, I said, when the clapping died down. My success didn't happen because I finally stood up to my family. It happened because I'd been working toward it all along, quietly, persistently, without needing anyone's permission or approval. The family that was planning to sell me had no idea what they actually had under their own roof. I clicked to the next slide. You already have more power than you think. Every woman in this audience has skills, knowledge, relationships, and potential that her family probably doesn't fully understand or appreciate. You might be the one they call when they need help, the one who's expected to drop everything for family emergencies, the one whose career is considered less important than everyone else's immediate needs. But that doesn't mean you actually have less to offer the world. A hand shot up in the middle of the audience. How do you deal with the guilt? My family makes me feel selfish every time I prioritize my own goals over their needs. Guilt is a tool of manipulation, I said firmly. And I say that with love for families everywhere, including my own. Healthy families feel proud when one member succeeds, not threatened. They find ways to celebrate achievements, not demand that those achievements be immediately shared or diminished for everyone else's comfort. I told them about the months after I'd walked away from my family, how I'd built my company without their input or interference, how I'd learned to make decisions based on my own judgment rather than their expectations or fears. The most important lesson I learned, I said, is that you can love your family deeply and still refuse to be sacrificed for their convenience. Love doesn't require you to make yourself smaller so other people can feel bigger. Love doesn't require you to abandon your dreams so other people can avoid the consequences of their choices. Another hand went up, this time from a young woman who looked like she was barely out of college. What if your family cuts you off? What if they stop speaking to you when you refuse to help the way they expect? Then you learn something valuable about the conditions that were attached to their love, I said gently. Real love, the kind worth having, doesn't come with a price tag. It doesn't require you to earn it through constant sacrifice. If someone stops loving you because you refuse to destroy your own life for their benefit, then what you had wasn't actually love to begin with. I could see this answer resonating throughout the audience. Women were leaning forward, taking notes, nodding to each other as if they were finally hearing someone put words to experiences they'd never been able to articulate. Let me tell you what happened when I enforced boundaries with my family, I continued. At first, there was anger, guilt-tripping, emotional manipulation. My mother accused me of being selfish and ungrateful. My sister cried and claimed I was destroying the family. But something interesting happened when I refused to back down. I clicked to my final slide. Your worth is not negotiable. They started, treating me with respect. Not immediately, not easily, but gradually. When my mother realized that guilt and manipulation wouldn't work anymore, she started actually listening to what I had to say. When my sister understood that I wouldn't solve her problems for her, she started solving them herself. And you know what? She's happier now. She's stronger now. She's more confident now because she knows she can handle her own life. I shared the story of our rebuilt relationships, how my mother now asked about my work with genuine interest instead of worrying about my unmarried status, how Madison had learned to ask for help respectfully instead of expecting sacrifice as her due. Today, my mother is proud of my success instead of threatened by it. My sister solves her own problems and occasionally asks for advice instead of demanding rescue. We have dinner once a month, and we talk about books, politics, our goals for the future. We have real relationships now, based on mutual respect and genuine affection, instead of patterns of obligation and resentment. I paused, looking out at the audience, seeing my own journey reflected in hundreds of faces. 2 years ago, my family tried to sell me for $250,000 to criminals who were planning to steal everything I had. Today, my personal net worth is over $30 million, and that number grows every quarter. But the real victory isn't the money. It's that I finally understand my own value, and I refuse to let anyone else set the price. The standing ovation lasted for 5 full minutes. As I looked out at the audience of women, mothers, daughters, sisters, entrepreneurs, students, professionals, dreamers, builders, I saw the same recognition in their eyes that I'd felt that night when I realized my family's plan to trade me away. They understood that they were worth more than whatever scraps of respect and consideration their families were willing to offer. They understood that their dreams mattered, that their goals were valid, that their success didn't have to be justified or shared or diminished to make other people comfortable. And most importantly, they understood that loving their families didn't require them to sacrifice themselves on the altar of everyone else's convenience. After my speech, dozens of women approached me with their own stories. A nurse whose family expected her to financially support 3 generations while she struggled to pay her own student loans. A lawyer whose parents kept borrowing money they never intended to repay, always with emergencies that somehow never ended. A teacher whose siblings treated her salary like a family fund, expecting her to cover everything from car repairs to vacation expenses. An engineer whose mother had been arranging dates with suitable men without asking her preferences, trying to marry her off to someone who could take care of her properly. Each story was different in its details, but the pattern was heartbreakingly familiar. Capable, accomplished, brilliant women who'd been trained to believe their primary value was in what they could provide to other people. That evening, I had dinner with my mother and Madison at a small Italian restaurant downtown. It was our monthly dinner, a tradition we'd started 6 months ago as part of rebuilding our relationships on healthier terms. "I'm so proud of you," my mother said as we waited for our meals, her eyes still bright from the afternoon speech. "Watching you up there today, seeing how those women responded to your story, I finally understand what I almost took away from you. And not just from you, from all the people whose lives you're going to change with your work. And from them," I added, gesturing toward the convention center visible through the restaurant's window. "Every woman who stays trapped in a pattern of family sacrifice is someone who's not reaching her full potential. That has ripple effects on entire communities, entire industries, entire generations." Madison nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about starting a support group at school for young women dealing with family financial pressure. Some of my students are working 2 jobs to support parents and siblings while trying to finish high school. They need to hear your message, but they also need practical strategies for dealing with the day-to-day reality of family expectations." "That's a brilliant idea," I said. "And Madison, I've been thinking about expanding our financial literacy program. Would you be interested in developing curriculum specifically focused on helping young women recognize and escape manipulative family dynamics around money and career choices?" As we talked about the program, discussing curriculum development and target demographics, I reflected on how fundamentally everything had changed in 2 years. My mother now asked about my work with genuine curiosity, celebrating my successes, instead of worrying that my independence made me unmarriageable. Madison had learned to solve her own problems and to ask for help respectfully when she genuinely needed it, offering something in return rather than expecting sacrifice as her due. Most importantly, I had learned that loving my family didn't require sacrificing my own dreams for their comfort. I had learned that the quiet, practical daughter my family had underestimated was actually the most powerful person in the room. I just hadn't known it yet. But now I did. And I was using that power to make sure other women discovered theirs. 2, because every woman deserves to know what she's really worth. And it's always more than anyone else's asking price. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.